1.
Hello, today we're going to talk about punctuation, and especially we're going to talk about full stops and commas. We're going to create a series with different punctuation marks, and this will be the first one of them. Yes, today we're focusing on full stops and commas. Why do we actually need punctuation in the first place? Well, using punctuations create a better flow for your text, and it's very essential when you're writing a text that you use correct punctuation. So we are going to focus on how to create that better flow in a text when you are writing your own text in class. So here I have given an example on why do we need punctuation. I have written a long sentence here, well, actually a couple of sentences, but there is no punctuation whatsoever. And therefore it's become very, very difficult to actually read out and make sense of it. So if I was just to read it out like this, it would be: the first time that I saw the frog, I was sitting in class, and my face was pressed up against the window next to me. From the outside, I had been drawing on my notebook, but once I noticed it couldn't stop looking at me either. And it is just one big chaos, and you can't really make any sense of it. So therefore, it's very important that we use correct punctuation. So if we change this to the punctuation that it should have, then it becomes more clear for us how to use it. So here we have: the first time that I saw the frog, I was sitting in class. Its face was pressed up to the window next to me from the outside. I had been drawing in my notebook, but once I noticed it, I couldn't stop looking. It couldn't stop looking at me either. If it had been a staring contest, I would have lost. Maybe frogs blinked, but with its big eyes smushed against the glass. This one didn't. So just adding that punctuation actually creates a much better flow, and you understand the text much easier. So therefore, when you are writing your own text, it's very important that you use punctuation. In this example, we have both. We have commas, we have full stops, we have brackets, and we even have some apostrophes. So that's just a few examples of different things that we have used. Now, what we're going to talk about first is full stops. Now, full stops are very important because they mark the beginning of a sentence and the end of a sentence. So they are very, very important. Now, the first example I've given here is Miss Weaver hadn't noticed. Now, Miss Weaver hadn't noticed is just a sentence, regular, normal sentence. And therefore, we, of course, put a full stop at the end. Now, it's very important that we remember to put that full stop, because if we don't put the full stop, we won't know whether or not the sentence is ended, and we will just continue reading. Now, the second example here is a little bit different. So I keep reliving that moment, full stop, over and over again. Now, over and over again is actually not a sentence, but we want that pause to make it clear and put expression on the fact that it's just repeating itself over and over again. So that's very important as well. The last one here is: there is a wide range of sandwiches, pies, cakes, etc. at very reasonable prices. Now, not only do I have a full stop here, but I also have a full stop here. That is because you also have to remember to put full stops after abbreviations. And abbreviations like etc. is very important that you put that there, because that ECT is not the full word or the full spelling of that word. It's the same if you put PM or AM or doc or anything like that that is abbreviated. You put a full stop at the end of it. We have to remember that also after a full stop, we always start the next letter or the next word with a capital letter. Now, you will also see that here I have actually not put in a full stop, and that is because the question mark acts as a full stop in this situation. When you have a question mark by the end of the sentence, you do not need to put a full stop as well. This is the same when you put exclamation marks. So exclamation marks or question marks can act as full stops in some sentences. The second thing we are going to talk about is commas. Now, commas is a little bit more tricky because there's so many different ways you can use commas. Now, the first one I've given here is in a list. So the school has a vegetable garden in which the children grow cabbage, onions, potatoes, and carrots. Now, you will notice that after each of the vegetables, I've put a comma, except for after potatoes. After potatoes, I've put an and. That's because when you have the last two objects in a list, you put an and. Instead of saying grow cabbage and onions and potatoes and carrots, then you just add the commas in to make it a list, and then it becomes much more smooth and readable. Now, if there is a list of only two things, you do not put comma in between them, you just put the and, so it becomes potatoes and carrots. So that's how you use them in lists. Now, in direct speech, you also use them. So, for example, here, Steve replied, comma, no problem. Now, we add in this comma because we want to make sure that there is a clear break between Steve replied and no problem. No problem is actually the direct speech. That is what Steve is saying. So, therefore, we want to separate those two things. In example B, we have just swapped it around. So, we start out with the direct speech. Here we are, they said. So here we are, comma, they said. So it's the same idea as up here, but now we have just swapped the sentence around. Now it also works when you have more than one thing that is being said. So for example, yes, comma, he said, comma, and I always keep my promises. Now if you were to read that without commas, it would be, yes, he said, and I always keep my promises. With commas, yes, he said, and I always keep my promises. It's much more smooth and much more running, so that's very important that you remember that. Now, there are exceptions, and exceptions, for example, is when you use exclamation mark or question mark. Now, before, I told you that it could act as a full stop, but it can also act as a comma. So in this sentence, stop him, comma, or in this case, exclamation mark, she shouted. So that is why we are not starting with a capital letter here, because it's not acting as full stop, no, it's acting as a comma. Now, the third thing that is very important here is to separate different clauses. Now, clauses are what we talk about when we talk about sentences. There is a main clause and there might be sub-clauses and things like that. But what we're talking about here is having had lunch, we went back to work. We went back to work is actually the main thing to say here. Having had lunch is just an added clause to sort of support to say when did we went back to work, and it's after lunch, so we already have an idea of when it is. So we have to add a comma between the different clauses. Passengers, comma, who have young children may board the aircraft first. So again, here we add in the different clauses, and it's very important that we use them that way. Now, the last thing I want to ask you before you come in on Monday is that you could write 5 lines using correct use of full stops and commas, and you have to include at least one sentence where you're listing things. It can be a short list or a long list, but of course it shouldn't take up all 5 lines. Okay? Very good. Hope you enjoyed it and learned a little bit about punctuation. I'm looking forward to seeing correct use of it in our next writing piece.